Mr. Looi. He is very much an important figure in the ASEAN circuit. For those who do not know Mr. Looi, he's the Assistant Director, Competition, Consumer Protection, and IPR Division. So he's got a very important portfolio at the ASEAN Secretariat. And he is very learned. We always learn so much whenever we see that Mr. Looi is speaking at an event. And very often you can't have an ASEAN event without Mr. Looi. So it's very good to see him complete that on this panel. So over to you, Mr. Looi, about activities in ASEAN supporting SMEs. Thank you, Mr. Looi.
Thank you, Audrey. Like Peter as well, I'll definitely have to meet up and buy you lunch for that very kind introduction as well. Yeah. Firstly, I just want to just make a few points as to how can government programs be more tailored to support MSMEs. I suppose one of the most important weaknesses for SMEs really is there is this lack of funding and insufficient digital capability. So MSMEs usually cannot build its own digital platform, and therefore the government can always help MSMEs to build digital platform for their digital transformation. So this is a very critical part of it, and I myself, I work with a lot of startups, and I do find that most of the time they do have issues about funding, and they do struggle as to find the sources of funds, and at the same time also how do they build on this digital platform. So the role of government is really very important. MSMEs, of course, need the government to facilitate also connections between their websites and payment systems, integrated e-commerce and payment systems, which should provide convenience to customers and enhancing transactions intention. Whilst there are, of course, a lot of payment systems which are already readily available in the internet, which they can actually hook on to their websites and also their platforms. But some of these payment systems do come with pretty steep percentages and interest payments, which will cut quite a lot of the business growth and commercial transactions which they get into. MSMEs, of course, need the government to promote safety regulations, establish digital transaction regulations, which is at this point in time still, I would say, it's at a pretty nascent or rather early stage, where even advanced economies like those in the European Union are still trying to debate with as to what exactly would be the roles for platforms for providers for the purposes of ensuring the obligations of MSMEs using such platforms. And there's a need to enforce digital payment security standards and certification. Government must also conduct security certification to ensure the safety of the payment system. Security of transactions would increase, of course, customers' trust, thereby increasing the number of transactions. So another challenge with MSMEs sometimes have is, as compared with the bigger boys who are already in the picture, is how much market trust could the global market can give for a small player. So in that sense, certification and security certification, where organizations such as ASEAN Secretariat, working hand in hand with big partners like Ukipo and Ukipo, would be very important, because it will help us determine what kind of digital environment that we can develop in order to ensure a level playing field between the big and also the small businesses. So therefore, government can help MSMEs to develop digital learning and training systems as well, so as to train their employees, because more often than not, the employees themselves within the small sectors, sometimes they are multitasking most of the time, and they wear so many different hats. They are tax experts, they're on the ground, they're doing marketing, and we are long enough in this business to know that some of these digital learning tools and knowledge really needs a bit of time to build. So in that sense, the digital learning platform and training system, which of course Ukipo and Ukipo, and we are actually working hand in hand as well with the ASEAN member states to develop, for example, our ASEAN IP Academy, which eventually would provide training as well, and not only just to government regulators, but eventually you stretch to the MSMEs as well. We have also made publications in relation to IP commercialization, valuation, and also the various IP regulations in terms of filings. What are the procedures that are available in AMS and also in other participating countries which are developing such publications with us to basically help the MSMEs guide themselves around in this big maze of IP protection. And of course, we are still continually working with WIPO and also Ukipo to continue to develop or rather provide capacity building activities. And we have also heard from WIPO, the initiatives in WIPO Green, some of the activities which that definitely would be very helpful to help so-called enhance the capacity of MSMEs to play in the bigger e-commerce fields. Other than that, of course, we note the accounting costs of keeping such businesses, the translation costs, the maintenance fees, and also the industrial units sometimes are not clear as to what the perks of getting such protection is. So the application process is also lengthy, time-consuming, and prohibits them from obtaining the relevant intellectual property protection. So this is very clear as far as the MSMEs is concerned, especially in the ASEAN context, where MSMEs forms a very big part of the growth of the business entities in this region, and they are driving the growth as well in this region. And as you know, ASEAN is headed towards becoming a very big player as far as the global, the total global GDP and growth rates is concerned. And we are one of the most attractive places for foreign direct investments. But yet at the same time, we also note that patent filings, for example, when it comes to resident patent filings compared to foreign patent filings are pretty low. We are not anywhere near the percentages of resident filings in advanced countries like Japan, Korea, the US, and also in Europe as well. So there is a lot of work that we need to do. So what we do in ASEAN is, of course, as you're well aware, we do have the ASEAN Action Plan. We've got a lot of initiatives to help develop the infrastructure, the IP landscape, and also to ensure that the AMS are actually having the relevant capacity building tools, the regional platforms, the enforcement platforms and cooperation, and also of late to exploit the commercialization and IP valuation, which is fast gaining a foothold in this region, so that MSMEs would be able to compete at least on a level playing field, and not only just in terms of valuing their businesses, but also having the full know-how and also the services of the financial sector to help them evaluate their businesses in order to give them the stockholders' value, which is required for the purposes of maximizing the innovation and creative spirit which they have. And we do have a lot because we have got close to 700 million people here, lots of businesses and entrepreneurial spirit. In terms of the unicorns, we are also getting there, but it's all tied up to a lot of innovation, creative initiatives, which have to be continuously implemented in this region. I think I'll stop there for now. For those who are keen to find out more about our ASEAN IP action plan and the initiatives that we have, please do visit our website at ASEAN IP website, and our action plan can be downloaded for more details. Thank you, Audrey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Looi. You did not let us down. Indeed, you gave us a very rich meal just now. So all of us are, trying to digest all that information, which I think we all had a very heavy dose of it from this panel. Indeed, I think you've touched on two very important points. Of course, there were many other areas that you focused on as well, but I think two very important points. Coming back to our theme of Build Back Better, particularly in the COVID and post-COVID period, we see increase of e-commerce and digitalization. I think the panel just before us had talked about that. And you touched on a very relevant point, which is cybersecurity, dealing with data and dealing with regional platforms for connectivity. And indeed, I think that the greatest challenge that face the SMEs and micro businesses as well is the fact that, this is not an easy area to upskill. And so you talked about the importance of capacity and capability building. I think really trying to tie just the knowledge and ability to transform from a brick and mortar to a digital company, to be able to transact, to connect, to do business digitally is one big area. And I think that I think many policymakers are now grappling with how best to address this, because we heard in the earlier panel as well, in the past, you would be looking at one fintech company per 60 minutes. Now it's one fintech per 30 minutes. So we have doubled, but has our capability understanding. So there's the asymmetry of information and ability as well. The other thing that you covered, which was very important as well, is the fact that you're not talking about a homogeneous, one single language, one single system region in ASEAN. You're talking about multi-jurisdictional issues. You're talking about language issues. You're talking about translations. And as a consequence, I think the work of ASEAN in creating these regional platforms are so critical, because if you're talking about commercializing of IP and encouraging entrepreneurs, SMEs, to use these systems, one of the first things that they are encountering is the cost to deal with multi-jurisdictions. The other thing is that, the overcoming the cost of hiring IP professionals. So that's why we have the Inventor Assist program administered by WIPO. We have, for example, grant systems that identified by UKIPO, very, very specific areas, for example, diagnostics and IP audit and IP access, and also the many multiple programs that WIPO is doing to create that outreach. So it's very encouraging to hear that, the ASEAN Action Plan has taken much of this into account, and in particular, interwoven the IP landscape with that. Is very encouraging. I also wanted to raise here the possibility, and maybe, for comments around the room. Indeed, I think policymakers can make a great difference in encouraging areas of focus for the companies. So the point that was touched on by Mr. Looi was about WIPO Green, that we're talking about, sustainable development goals. And for example, do we think that when the policies around the globe start to focus on these things, we'll see a greater impact, a greater change? So maybe one question I could raise is, when we look at grants and even sometimes tax incentives, which are accelerated by policy considerations, how can we, focus this to be able to help companies build back better by refocusing them, for example? I can give an example in Singapore. For when we talk about government funding for Singapore projects, very often it looks at control in ensuring that when there is public-private collaborations, there is a focus on the commercialization of IP after its primary purpose is fulfilled. And this is done through the grant terms and the funding terms. I'm interested to hear the views from around the room, how, for example, if you look at support. So I think in Philippines, you talk about loans, right? In UK, we talked about the grants. And ASEAN is now contemplating maybe some kind of structure in connecting business with finance as well, loans or investment. And I think Mr. Looi mentioned about the fact that we have huge FDI. How is this connected, and how do we help policymakers push to build back better? So anyone around the room like to kickstart and discuss this? And I know we're running tight on time. I'm taking the liberty of, with the permission of the organizers, to extend 5 minutes, because I think the earlier session was overrun. So if you bear with me, everybody, we'll take a little bit more time to discuss this question as well. Anybody around the room?
Well, Audrey, thank you. Yeah, perhaps I could just start the discussion with a very broad perspective, because the actual implementation or development of grants in such programs is very much at the national level. But I guess I'd premise this saying this is my view, not necessarily WIPO's, but I think the assistance governments should provide really does need to be tailored, and in doing so, I think governments need to really listen to the sector and liaise with business, build relationships with chambers of commerce, SME associations, to understand what the needs of the market are, at what time, at what part of the innovation cycle government grants or assistance should kick in. Because if the governments, we've seen lots of examples where governments will build something or offer something and it just doesn't get the market take up because it's not meeting the need of the specific market. So that would just be my initial response. I really think governments need to talk with business, liaise with business, and understand what the needs are at particular moments of the innovation cycle.
Mr. Looi, I thought you had a comment. You look like you were poised to say something.
I just want to add on what Peter has said. I suppose, the question of grants and tax incentives and all that is really a matter of each government's economic sectors and ministries, and to try to tailor to their respective so-called situation in terms of where they are in terms of their startups and their businesses and things like that, and what kind of industry that they would like to develop. But other than grants and tax incentives, I suppose another area really is to work with venture capitalists who, like for example, there was a speaker who was mentioning about the green initiatives and green tech, and they would like to develop a lot of it. And I myself personally have met with some venture capitalists who would invest in technologies and businesses which focuses on the green environment and to tackle climate change, for example. So there you are. We can try to develop, or rather encourage the growth of venture capitalists, especially in certain areas in which you would like to grow, and then try to match them, or rather get them involved in all the innovation centers where all the startups are. There is a lot of innovation centers which have been set up where all these startups are actually located, and they work very closely with the universities, research, R&D as well. And this is where it can constitute a very good platform for the so-called innovators to come together with potential financiers. But at the same time, of course, the government can also come in and talk about the grants and tax incentives and things like that. But usually grants are very competitive. I suppose when it comes to all these venture capital, it's also very competitive as well. But what we are looking at is when we are looking at the private sector venture capital, we are looking at a much bigger pot of monies which are available globally for investments as compared to, let's say, grants and a tax incentive within a country kind of a perspective. So I suppose we can add on to the totality of funds which might be available for the startups and also for the MSMEs in order to so-called support and invest in their ideas and creativity. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Because we're running out of time, if you have a 1-minute comment, Minda or Sally, do jump in, and then I will have to wrap up. Who would like to go first? Minda?
Thank you, Audrey. Okay, when we talk of policy making about intellectual property, actually, what we did, the IPOFAIL, is that we made our own initiative to talk to the policymakers and to integrate about the creative industry here in the Philippines, as well as the inventions that covers all. We wanted to have one policy to really help our country, our economy to grow bigger, because as of now, when we're talking of the index, the GII, we are at the lowest number, to be honest. That's why we are working on it to have more pillars so that we will be able to come up with a good economy with the contribution on innovation and intellectual property. So that's what we're doing right now.
Thank you very much. Sally.
Thanks. Thanks. Our programs, our grant programs, aren't sector specific or at the moment, but we do monitor and evaluate which regions and which sectors we're engaging with. I think for us, the important thing is working with partners so we can work with those and understand what's relevant in their specific area of the UK, in line with also working with other government departments such as BEIS, so that we are working with them and following some of their policy thinking. So there's two ways that we approach it, through our partners and through other government departments, and working with those, and our policymakers working with other policymakers across government.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being so succinct. so I think it leaves me to now just quickly wrap up. Some of the key takeaways. I know we've said a lot, but let me try to, at least at a broad level, highlight so that our friends around the room can take this home with them. And I think we are all agreed that policymakers need to recognize innovation and technology transfer are powerful triggers, especially for long-term economic growth, investment, new business models, education, job training, job creation, especially when we talk about MSMEs. So what can be done? I think some of the steps that we've articulated here is incorporate IP into national policies as strategic development tools. Secondly, promote formation of well-integrated, interconnected innovation ecosystems, particularly if you can have intergovernmental agencies working together. Thirdly, encouraging public, private, and academic actors involved in the innovation ecosystem to work together well, and invest in human capital and training, particularly in new areas such as e-commerce and digitalization and cybersecurity. And finally, to increase the use of fiscal and technological tools to support the commercialization of IP, the use of IP by MSMEs, and also to look at, encouraging the financial ecosystem to look at this sector closely and support them, whether through VCs or other forms of financial support. So with that, I want to thank everyone for staying with us till the end. I know that we are the last panel for the evening, and I want to thank especially all my panelists here and their views and all the rich sharing, in particular when we went across the globe, literally across the globe. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Sally, Peter, Minda, and Mr. Looi for joining us, and thank you, my audience.
Great, thank you very much, everyone. And likewise, so thank you to Audrey for moderating the session so well. Sally, Peter, Minda, and Looi for sharing all your insights about your national IP strategies, etc. So I really hope that our participants have enjoyed the webinar and found it really useful. In the meantime, actually, I would like to invite Mr. Looi to remain on stage as we move to our final session of the day, which is to summarize the webinar and also to deliver the concluding remarks. So Mr. Looi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Desmond, Mr. Adam Williams, distinguished speakers and panelists, leads and members of the AWGIPC, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good evening once again from Jakarta. The insights and lessons that we have obtained today from the presentation and the panel discussions are invaluable. Just let me share with you some key takeaways. In the welcome address, Mr. Williams, of course, emphasized that the economy was badly hit by the pandemic, but we are actually observing that the business activities is starting to resume now to pre-pandemic level, and it's therefore a good time to take stock in order to build back better. So IP protection, of course, has continued to grow. R&D expenditure has grown 8.5%, and JV, including patent filings, has grown 3.5%. So the right innovation policies in place will be very critical now as we strive for the next phase to recover from the challenges of the pandemic. So the government will be in the right place to foster such innovation, especially for MSMEs. Mr. Eric Gunn, Associate Professor and Head of IP Innovation Management Program, Singapore University of Social Science, spoke on IP education and training. They shared Singapore's perspective on IP education and their plan and strategy to become the global IP hub in Asia, which is part of the Singapore IP Strategy 2030. He mentioned that to achieve this goal, a skill enabler manpower are required, and Singapore have the IP competency framework, IPCF, to drive IP manpower development in Singapore with specific career tracks in the development of IP specialists. So, for example, programs for professionals and mid-careerists who are interested to transit into IP industries. And good examples, SUSS and IPOS, Masters of IP Innovation Management, with 3-track specialization in management, IP, technology, and patent agency. Mr. Max Burrow, head of Asia Pacific Teck Nation, spoke on the digital economy. He mentioned the importance, he mentioned the role which Teck Nation played in the growth platform in helping MSMEs to scale regionally and internationally, and how they have accounted for actually 30% of the unicorns in the UK and help bring foreign talent to support the growth in the UK and work with the UK government through digital trade network. There is also it's also notable to see that the startup and scale-up ecosystem in the UK Teck is actually valued at $585 billion. And tech business, as I mentioned earlier, and also emphasized by Audrey, it's born every 30 minutes in the UK sector in 2020. And the UK now joins the US and China to be the only 3 countries to have created more than 100 tech unicorns. So effectively, it is just so important that we need to focus on this particular industry, the cybersecurity, health tech, fintech, deep tech, green tech, and how all these unicorns are driving the next and the future growth of the region. Ms. Anya van der Prop, of Senior Program Coordinator, Climate Change and Food Security, WIPO, spoke on climate change IP and introduction to WIPO Green. And as she rightly pointed out as well, the world leaders are now meeting in the COP26 in the UN Climate Change Conference. However, things are not moving as fast. And you can note how Greta Thunberg has actually leading, protests and basically mentioning that the speed, the action on the part of governments are not as fast as promised. So we do hope to see more work going on there. But she also highlighted policies that would foster low carbon innovation and diffusion, and also access to finance to SMEs, and to ensure effective protection and enforcement of IP rights, plus science and R&D. The data from the Patent Cooperation Treaty shows green tech patent activity taken in 2019, with US-China is strong, with US and China being the strongest. And for industrialized countries, more actors are coming up into play as well. So green energy patent filing are increasingly becoming important. And it's also notable to see actually in solar energy filing is going down, but storage of thermal building installation going up. Transportation hybrids been going down, but hydrogen powers cars are increasing. So the pace of technological changes is also quite competitive among itself. And therefore, we need to watch the development of technological progress and to actually catch the right tech growth in the future, so as to ride on the growth in the innovation economy. In the first panel discussion on the UK innovation strategy, it is great to note that in the UK, the Prime Minister himself takes a keen interest on the innovation economy, in the innovation plans and development of the country. It just goes to show how important it is, innovation is as far as the future growth sector is concerned. So the real win really is to find the mutually beneficial, what is mutually beneficial for company to work, and to get companies to come together and to grow this network, which is already happening, but to build on the collaborative relationships, which of course would only spur greater growth in the future. In the last panel discussion, Build Back Better, we actually note the importance of government and its role to help spur MSMEs in order to grow. better and faster in the longer term. I think that is all, dear ladies and gentlemen. But please let me take a few minutes to thank the UK IPO for supporting and organizing this webinar. This constitutes, of course, the third webinar in a series of webinars on digital technology enforcement and innovation. Let me also thank the speakers, moderators, and panelists for taking their valuable time to impart to us their experience and expertise. Members of the AWG IPC, IP officers, and related agencies have taken their time to attend this seminar. Last but not least, dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention, and hopefully you'll be able to apply some of these lessons or insights learned from this webinar for the development of the respective innovation and education policies to support MSMEs in the preservation and development of their IP assets as they head towards the future of innovation and digital economy. Thank you once again. Please stay safe, and over to you, Desmond.